Start, then I'll ask Amy to start the live stream. Are you ready to make a start, Chair?
Please do, Amy. Ready to go.
Thank you very much. Over to you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this session of the Resources Scrutiny Committee. It's Wednesday, the 17th of September, and it's 6 o'clock. Whilst everybody settles in for the evening's agenda, I'll just quickly go through our introductions. So can I remind everybody present that this remote meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and then this recording is going to be archived for future viewing. If participants wish to speak, can they please use the remote raise hand function located in the bottom left-hand side of the screen. This will put you into the speaker queue accordingly. When subsequently you're invited to address by myself, please press your activation button in the bottom centre of the screen. Please be patient and aware there will be a small time lag and that you do not need to press the button again. The response of the system is not instant, and if the button or desk microphone changes to red, then that means it's responded. If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to address by myself, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function when invited to address by myself, and could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If for whatever reason this isn't possible, please bring this to my attention or to the Democratic Services Officer. Once you've participated, remember to turn your activation button off so it doesn't delay any other participants from coming onto the screen, and also to avoid any background noise when other participants are speaking. So we'll welcome everybody to this meeting. That's members, non-committee members, members of the public and officers. And we'll move swiftly on to part one, which is our apologies for absence. Have we had any, please?
None received by myself, Chair.
And I haven't received any either, Liz, so
thanks.
Everybody's here, which is great. Number 2 then on our agenda, this is our declarations of interest and the nature of such interests. Do we have any today, please? No?
Again, none
Excellent.
received to Democratic Chair either, thanks.
Smashing. Agenda item 3 then. This is the report of the Chief Executive, Vale Glamorgan Public Service Board Annual Report 2024 to 2025. I believe we've got at first Helen Moses from the Vale Glam to talk us through this report, and then followed by a little piece from Claire Bynum from the Health Board. So Helen, can I ask you to take us through? Evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you. As you say, I'll give an introduction to the main parts of the report, and then Claire's going to pick up some of the aspects that are particularly relevant to some of the services that she leads on and works very closely with the PSB on. So the PSB annual report is produced every July through the PSB, and it focuses on the progress of the work that's been undertaken in relation to the PSB's 5-year wellbeing plan. The report is presented to this committee as the designated committee for the PSB, but as stated within the report and in response to recommendations made previously when consideration of the PSB's annual report, we have through the year taken reports to different committees about some of the aspects of work that the PSB is focused on, for example, age-friendly and also the work in our more deprived areas. We've also included more information within the Project Zero progress reports about the work that's being undertaken with regards to climate change through the PSB. So with the papers that have been shared with members for tonight's meeting, there's the cover report, and then there are links to both the full annual report and also a summary version of the report, which we've produced again this year. And again, that's been in response to comments and feedback from Scrutiny Committee in terms of access to the report and the information. So within the annual report itself, we've provided a bit of context at the introduction to that and remind people about the priority areas and objectives of the Vale PSB. So the objectives for the Vale PSB are about a more resilient and greener Vale, a more active and healthier Vale, and a more equitable and connected Vale. Then there's 3 priority work streams within the 5-year plan: responding to the climate and nature emergencies, working with people who live in our most deprived areas, and becoming an age-friendly Vale. And the approach that's been taken within the annual report is to provide progress on a number of different areas of work, setting out the context for that work, some of the activities that have been undertaken and the progress made, but then linking that back to the different steps that are set out in the PSB's wellbeing plan to show the integrated nature of the work. And across those steps, for example, within the plan, we've got work around engagement, tackling health inequalities, climate change, food poverty, and volunteering. And members will have seen from the different details of work that provided with the annual report that many of the activities being undertaken through the PSB and by partners will link across a number of those pieces of work. So within the report, we then set out in section 2 some of that progress update. And the areas of focus have particularly been the work on age-friendly, the work around Your Place, which is the work in our 3 most deprived areas, work on climate and nature emergencies, the work around healthy travel, good food and movement, and the Food Vale Partnership, and then Safer Vale and Value in the Vale. And across each of those projects, we've set out some of the context for that work, the work that's been undertaken, as I say, and the progress made. And just to highlight some of the aspects of that work. So, for example, on age-friendly Vale, a Vale strategy and action plan has been agreed by partners, and that was developed through a range of consultation engagement, both with the community and with a network of partners. And workers continue to build those relationships. So again, through the Vale strategy, 50+ strategy forum to make sure we're engaging with the community, but also to build up a really good network of partners to make sure that collectively we're focusing on what those different needs and aspirations might be of some of our older residents. So that work is continuing. A range of events have also been undertaken through the year in conjunction with the strategy forum, and they provided opportunities for engagement and consultation, for information and sharing to be provided and support, but also provided a social activity as well, and some aspects of work to sort of to reflect some of the issues that some of our older residents may be feeling around some isolation as well. Within the report, we've also flagged some of the areas of work being taken forward by partners. So, for example, the work around the Golden Pass, which the council is undertaking around physical activity, work by the Fire and Rescue Service around home safety advice, and the police around targeting different campaigns as well. Then to move on to some of the work that's been undertaken around Your Place. There's been a continued focus on engagement, and that's a theme across all the work of the PSB, but a particular focus on discussions around health and employment. We held a number of workshops with partners and members of the community to discuss those issues and what some of those activities might be, building on the data and the findings of the engagement. And that's led to some subgroups being formed, a health subgroup which is being led by colleagues in health, and an employment subgroup that's being led by colleagues in our Learning and Skills Directorate. They're bringing in different partners to explore what some of the solutions might be and how to take forward some of those activities. And they've again included things like providing information and better access to services, thinking about some of the after-school activities, how we can work within some of our schools to engage with parents more around some of the opportunities as well. So that work is being developed, and we're starting to focus working with colleagues in the police around what some of the activity might be around community safety, but also being mindful of the work of the Safer Vale Partnership as well within that area, making sure that we're complementing and not duplicating any work there. Work has also continued around the climate and nature emergency, and within the report there's detail of different activities that different partners are undertaking, showing their commitments. So that ranges from work around their estate, behaviour change, carbon emissions and procurement. We've also refreshed and revised and produced a new climate and nature charter setting out the commitment of the PSB around those different aspects of work. And we were successful in obtaining funding through the Shared Prosperity Fund to engage consultants, and we're now embarking on a climate change risk assessment through the PSB. This is using a tool and framework that's been developed by Welsh Government and Natural Resources Wales, and that's to assist PSBs to better understand some of the impacts of climate change on services and on their communities, and to then inform future work in terms of our next wellbeing assessment and wellbeing and plan, and what the opportunities for collective action are. So we're just at early stages actually in that work, having appointed consultants to support that work with us. We've also, through the climate change subgroup of the PSB, been sharing information around our carbon emissions, how we're using that data, aspects around circular economy and also biodiversity. So taking those opportunities for shared learning. Within the report, we then talk about the work around Healthy Travel Charter and the progress that's being made through Good Food and Movement, and also the Food Vale Partnership. And Claire will touch on those in a moment. I then just wanted to flag up that within the report, we've included information around the work of the Safer Vale Partnership, which reports into the PSB, but is also a partnership in its own right. And some of the good work that's undertaken through Value in the Vale, which is led by a team in our housing department, but it's very much been supported by colleagues within the PSB, and some funding to support that work to encouraging volunteering. And again, recognising the benefits of volunteering in both skills development, but also that contribution to the community. Then just to highlight within the annual report, we've set out some of the key evidence that we use to inform our work and to sense check our progress. So that's in section 3 of the report. And that links again back to the findings of the wellbeing assessment, which shaped our priorities. And we're starting to think now about what the next wellbeing assessment will look like, which will be a key piece of work for us next year. So those are the aspects that I wanted to highlight to members tonight, and I'll hand over to Claire, who'll pick up on some of the other aspects of the work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So my name's Claire Vine, and I'm the Director of Public Health for Cardiff and the Vale University Health Board. I'm really pleased to be with you this evening, so thank you for the invite, and very much appreciated to have the opportunity to share some of the excellent work that's been done in partnership across our area. So I said I would touch on a few aspects, one of which is the Good Food and Movement programme of work that we have. This really uses a true whole system approach. Now, whole system approach is a phrase that gets thrown about in lots of occasions, but this is utilising it in its absolute true sense. So it's looking at all of the layers of society, so the individual up to the community groups, up to society itself, looking at how do we tackle and pull all of the levers at the same time to make sure that we can really address the obesogenic environment in which we live. We know that over the last 20 years, people's willpower hasn't particularly changed, but the obesogenic environment in which we live really has changed. So the places where we live, where we work, where we play, where we spend our free time, have absolutely changed. So, for example, there's less opportunity for physical activity in our daily lives. So we're all sitting here, aren't we, on computers, and we probably haven't made the effort to maybe go out of the house and have a little walk, which we might have done if we were going into the office. Perhaps on public transport, we might walk to the bus stop and then away from the bus stop or onto the train. So things like washing machines, our computers, even just cleaning our own houses now has got so much easier and is less physically active than it used to be. So the whole environment in which we live has changed, and also the number of triggers that we see encouraging us to eat high fat, sugar, salts products has also changed over the last 20 years. So whether that's sponsorship on the front of sports team shirts that you might see, or products placed in films and on television, those sorts of things really have an impact in terms of making people think about food and also triggering them to eat high fat, sugar, salt foods rather than the more healthy options. And we know that the Vale of Glamorgan is really leading the way to redress this balance. And actually what we see is that the companies actually target our areas of deprivation with their advertising, with their fast food outlets. So we just need to try and redress that balance. We've also got a huge new focus on children aged 0 to 5 in the Good Food and Movement Plan. It's been a trend across Wales that we've had an increasing level of children aged 0 to 5 who are living with obesity. Now, that's really important because obesity tracks from childhood into adulthood, and it's really hard to address that once we get that far down the track. So we want to try and prevent people getting into that category. So the number of children who start their lives with this challenge is highly related, as I say, to adult obesity that we see later in life. And we're really seeing the positive impacts in the Vale of Glamorgan. So 77.5% of children were a healthy weight when they're starting school. That's really positive. So we're about the average for England, which is fantastic, and we're well above the average for Wales. So the average for Wales is 73.5%. And we've made a difference even in the last year. So it's gone up from 76.9% up to 77.5%, which is a really promising start. But we must make the healthy choice the easy choice for people. And that leads me nicely on to the Food Vale work. So again, we've been working in partnership, both with other statutory organisations such as yourselves and also many, many third sector organisations to attempt to have a thriving, healthy and sustainable food system across the Vale of Glamorgan. And we know that planning is underway for the 3rd annual Food Vale Trail. So if you haven't been to one of those before, please do come along to the events that are being organised for that. And the Food Vale strategy has been developed with many partners as well. It's really important that we do this piece of work so that sustainable and healthy food options are available to everyone. So, for example, the new St Athan Pantry has been accessed 538 times and prevented 19 kilograms of food going just into waste. So that's fantastic. We know that by working together, we can make a difference to reducing health inequalities. And we're really focusing our energy in the Health Board on reducing those health inequalities and improving and protecting the health and well-being of our local population. We want people to live a healthier life for longer so that there's reduced demand on both health and social care services by compressing that morbidity so that people live a healthy life for longer. And we're really keen to do that in partnership with you. I just want to thank the other partners around the room in terms of the PSB. We find it really valuable as a health board, and I'm happy to take questions if that would be appropriate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for coming tonight, Claire. And it's music to my ears that that we're going in the right direction with our young people and the food that they're eating. As you know, the Vale of Glamorgan are really happy to support all of these initiatives, but are quite proud to be a steering group member of the Welsh Veg in Schools project that you spoke about. And that ambition, which with Food Sense Wales, as you know, is to get 25% of the veg in schools organic and locally grown by 2030, and we're all on that road together. It's a really, really, maybe it's ambitious target, but we're trying to build a resilient food system by doing so. So that's really interesting, and it's good work. Does anybody from the committee have any questions at this point for Helen? And I can see 2 hands up. We've got Councillor Campbell. I think you might have just got in there before Councillor Carroll. So would you like to ask your questions? Thank you.
Apologies, Councillor Carroll. I think I put you to the punch there. I'm interested to know who actually sits on the PSB. Apologies if it's in the report and I missed it. But obviously we've had a lot of conversation there about education, and it'd be interesting to know who actually sits on the PSB. I believe there is lay people who have been elected to it as well, but it'd be interesting to see who is actually on the membership of it. If you willing to answer that.
Oh,
Yes,
thank you, Helen. Will you come in with that one? Thank you.
Yeah. So the membership of the PSB, there's 4 statutory partners, which is the Council, the Health Board, Natural Resources Wales and the Fire Service. So they're represented from the council, it's represented by the council leader and the chief executive. I also attend meetings, and Tom Bowring is director of resources, and the leader is the current chair of the PSB. From the health board, we have the chair and the chief executive attend, and Claire, as well as the director of public health from the health board and the director of strategic planning. So you can see it's a senior level and actually a range from those organisations. From the fire service, it can depend in terms of whether it's the chief officer or one of their key members who kind of stays very much involved, and we've had some continuity there in terms of the membership. And natural resources Wales, again, it's one of their senior officers, and then other colleagues are involved in different subgroups. Other members of the PSB, so they're not statutory, but they're invited to attend, include the police and the Police and Crime Commissioner. We have a representative from Welsh Government and Cardiff and Vale College, as well as the Probation Service. We have the Chief Executive of Glamorgan Voluntary Services, and there's also a place for a Town and Community Council representative on the PSB board as well. So that's kind of the key membership of the board. There are details on the PSB website, and that across different subgroups and different activities that we have, we might widen what the invite is in terms of making sure we've got relevant colleagues from both within those organisations and from other organisations as well. So hopefully that provides information in terms of that. And then because it's the organisations, I suppose, that are the members of the PSB, depending again on some of the activities, the work, the information, we will take that back within our organisations and making sure that we're having those relevant conversations or bringing people to those meetings as well. So different directors, for example, from the council might attend for different topics of discussion.
Thank you, Helen. It's good to know that it's kind of open to different people in regards to different stages in specific conversations that you're having, rather than kind of stuck to a specific membership, because as you say, it's going across so many different areas, and when you're having these conversations, it's important to bring as many people in so that it's relevant to as many people as possible, and then they're taking it back and having those open conversations within their organisation. So I was just kind of checking how widespread we were going with this, rather than kind of the information is stuck between like quite a small group of people, and then we're not opening it up for wider discussion. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Carroll, please come in and ask your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to focus my questions on the Safer Vale aspect, and in particular regarding crime prevention. I'd just like to get a feeling for how, and this would be better directed at Helen, how the council feels engagement with outside agencies, and in particular the police, is with regard to this.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Helen, are you able to give a PSB view of that? Thank you.
Yes, so from the PSB perspective, then yes, we have good attendance from representatives from the police at the PSB meetings, and then in terms of our work through subgroups, so we've got a climate change subgroup, we've got the work through the Your Place work that I was talking about in our most deprived areas. So again, we're looking to take forward that work, and particularly around that community safety angle now, to pick up those issues with police colleagues. So we have got engagement through those PSB mechanisms as well. I don't attend the Safer Vale partnership meetings, so I'm not in a position to comment in terms of the detail of the work of that Safer Vale partnership, but it is very much a partnership approach involving a range of organisations to take forward the agenda, from the council to the fire service to health and the police.
Thank you. The reason I ask that, I personally have concerns regarding the level of police resources allocated towards our communities. In my own area of Landock, for example, when I first became the councillor, we had a PCSO who was frequently visible. Dawn is still the PCSO, and she's fantastic, and I just want to place on record that this isn't a slight on her at all. But over time, she has gradually been asked to cover a much wider area. And that's meant that it's been physically impossible for her to maintain the levels of visibility that she once did. And so there's a resourcing issue there. And as a PSB, if you're going to deliver safer communities, I think pressing the police to resource our communities properly is important. I mean, I take a few issues that we have in Landock. We have antisocial car meets at West Point Industrial Estate that arise from time to time. We've had issues with fireworks being set off at completely antisocial hours. I mean, when I say the middle of the night, I mean sort of 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. There's been several reports of suspicious behaviour near the bus stop at the Barons Court and that's been a report that's been shared with me quite a few times. Now, these are all issues that are of concern to residents. Obviously, with regard to suspicious behaviour, a regular police presence is likely to reassure people and act as a deterrent. And the same is the case when it comes to things like noise disturbances, car beats, etc. If there are police dispatched to the area quickly or just around the area, it doesn't take a genius to work out that the people responsible for that behaviour are less likely to engage with it because they know that they're far more likely to be caught. So I would be grateful if the PSB could, within the meetings that it has at the Safer Vale level and also within its engagement more generally with South Wales Police, really push for the need for greater police resourcing within our communities. It does both reassure residents and deter crime, like those incidents or suspected incidents that I've raised as examples, and it would just reassure everybody and make our communities safer for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. We can definitely pass that comments back. Sorry, Helen, did you want to come back in? I do apologise. I was just going to say that the committee can pass those comments back in that, you know, for our local communities, we would just like the PSB to just be aware of our concern of a lack of resource in the policing area. That's all. But yeah, please speak. Sorry.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful as well. We will be feeding back from the conversations on the annual report tonight to our PSB meeting that's coming up shortly, so we can sort of flag up that was one of the concerns raised, and we can certainly raise that with colleagues, both within the Safer Vale partnership itself and with the police to advise them of the concerns that have been raised tonight and those issues. So yeah, that's not a problem at all.
Thank you, Helen. That's great. Councillor Johnson, please come in and ask your questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Helen and Claire, for those presentations tonight. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the report, obviously. This is the second year now that this wellbeing plan, the present plan, has been in place. And obviously, there's a lot of good work ongoing across the PBS partnership and in a number of different fields. But within the context of the report, I do worry that this golden thread that seems to be connecting the work would make it more apparent, especially when we consider where we would like to be at the end of this plan. As I said, this is the second year, but the report that is before us, it does look to me as somewhat of a list of actions by various partners, and it isn't clear to me what exactly the intent is, how we are going to revise this work at the end of the plan. And further, there are no aims, no clear aims anyway, for me as somebody who comes in to read this report. It's very obvious that there are intentions by the boards and by the partners which contribute to this. But as I'm reading through the report, it's not entirely clear where we want to reach as an end point by the end of all of this. So just a few further comments. So for example, there are no KPIs that I can see. It's not clear, especially, what the aim is at the end of this 5-year period. It isn't clear whether we are on track to achieve. It's not clear what sort of investment the board has or the partners have in reaching this aim. And so it's very difficult for me to read through this and to know what exactly the results we expect in terms of impact as a result of this very broad work that is happening here. If I can just note a couple of points within that, just in terms of, there's an explanation about 19 steps which are related to every one of the 7 or 8 different plans. And it's difficult for me to read through this because of the choice of colour. I'm not sure if this is a personal sight issue for me, perhaps it is colour blindness, but it's difficult for me to read it visually. There are some things within the document where it's obvious that it was going to be an embedded graph, but that graph doesn't actually appear. And I remember worrying about a lack of context and a lack of explanation, perhaps, at the beginning of each of these 7 or 8 different plans. How this goes back then to the original plan. Because I do have concerns that with so many different projects going down these divergent pathways, that golden thread is no longer there in terms of how these all relate back to the original roots. And so just to summarise, it's obvious that there's a lot of work ongoing, yes. But I'm a little lost in the narrative, and I don't always see evidence of strategy in terms of where exactly we wish to be at the end of the 5 years of this plan, whether we're on track, and any sense of evaluation of the work at this point. I see that there's a lot of work, but I'm not seeing any evidence of whether or not there is an impact. And as somebody who does scrutinise the work here, as a member of the public and a councillor, I would like to know more about this. And this is just to note, as someone who is reading this, and just to note, as somebody who is a member of Barry Town Council, I think it's incredibly important to note any work that the town councils are undertaken, Barry, Penarth and Lltydfawr, of course, in this report, and not just refer any readers onwards to the partners' websites. If the town councils are going to be important partners themselves in this board, then of course any work that they are undertaking should be a part of this report too. So a lot of comments there, and you're very welcome, Helen, to reply. Thank you.
Thank you for the feedback on the report, Councillor Johnson. Apologies with regard to the accessibility then, and we'll look in terms of some of the colours that we've used and make sure that future reports, or if we can enhance the existing report to make sure they are more accessible. There is a lot of information, I think, within the report, and we're very conscious that, as you say, we are 2 years into the current wellbeing plan, but within that, a lot of the projects that we've done, we've been developing the plans to deliver those different aspects. So, for example, the age-friendly action plan, we've been developing the revision of the good food and movement work, which is replace, move more and eat well, and we've been taking forward work around a food veil strategy. As that work now embeds, there will be measures associated with those different projects. So hopefully next year's annual report, you will be able to see some more sort of direct information about some of those impacts of some of that work that's now got to that stage. The work of the PSB is quite broad in terms of actually what the challenge is to the PSB regarding environmental, social, economic and cultural wellbeing and those priorities that we've identified. And we're also conscious that across all the different partners, there's a range of activities that we do that contribute to those objectives that are both individual actions of those organisations, but also that what we do collectively as well. So it's very much, I suppose, reflecting the relationships that we have across those partners and the difference that made, but also showing, I suppose, the contributions of different partners, which we're quite keen to make sure that we do within the annual report as well. I take on board your comment that it's not necessarily very clear in terms of that reflection back to what's within the wellbeing plan, where we've set out the priorities and those 19 steps. And we can look to build on that for future reports to make sure that that thread is clearer to the reader in terms of how the different activities you were doing actually contribute to what we set out in that initial plan. So we will bear in mind those comments in terms of both ensuring that our narrative is clearer, but that also then that the outcomes are clearer within that as well as the accessibility. I think I've covered, with regard as well to those contributions of the town councils, again, we can look in terms of how we can reflect more clearly the contribution that's made there. And apologies for that oversight there. I think I've covered most of the points that you've raised there, but forgive me if there's anything else that you'd like me to pick up, and I can come back on that as well. Thank you.
Helen. Thank you, Helen. No, I think that does answer most of the points that I have raised. Just very quickly, if I may, one of the things that Claire Bainan raised was about being a healthy weight, and she, just to note, it's not entirely clear just from the report. Is she meaning the number of children, young children and babies who are obese, who are amongst that 22 or 23%, or is she referring to those who have not reached a healthy weight, because that is lower than the target, rather than just not being obese? So we know that there are a lot of details lost from that narrative. So I just want to raise what percentage of that cohort are obese, or how much are below that, because it's one thing to say that a specific percentage have reached a healthy weight, but it also goes both ways, doesn't it? And whether it is higher or lower than the target. I'm not sure if Claire has any further statistics to support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Claire, are you still able to come in with some extra statistics on the healthy weight? That would be really good if you have. Don't know if we've got to Councillor Johnson, but oh no, here we are. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much. I wonder if you could help me with the questions, because I couldn't see where to click to follow along with the translation. I clicked all the buttons on the screen, but nothing helped me, I'm afraid.
I think the audio settings would be the appropriate place there. The question was regarding whether you referred to the percentage or in the cohort who are of a healthy weight, but obviously healthy weight can go in both directions and can be those who are overweight and those who are underweight. So I was just looking to clarify, sort of the percentages around that.
Sure, thank you very much, and apologies for not having found that button in the settings. So yes, indeed, you're quite right. So healthy weight is considered is actually done by the child's age as well as their BMI. So they're measured for height, they're measured for weight, and their age is put into an equation. And you'll probably remember, if you've had children, sort of the red book, and you'll have the various different lines that go up to say underweight, lower band of sort of healthy weight, upper band of healthy weight, and then it goes into obesity and severe obesity. So it's based upon those predictions on that from the red book that you may have seen previously. If not, I can happily share those with you after the meeting. But in terms of the percentages, there's a very small percentage of children who are underweight. And that goes across the whole of the UK. That's not just for us in terms of our local area. There's a band then of about 20% of children who are in that obese category, so living with obesity. And there's a much smaller number of people who have that levels of severe obesity. So during the pandemic, we saw a huge increase in terms of obesity and severe obesity, and they've come back down again, which is great news, because obviously we all had a very much restricted life, didn't we, when we were in the pandemic. Our physical activity was even more restricted. I can remember times when we were only allowed out of the house once a day to go and be physically active, which obviously is going to have an impact. And also, people were just generally a bit more miserable and probably ate and drank more than they would have done normally, because it was one of the few pleasures, let's say, we had in life. But we saw that pan out in the 0 to 5 age group as well, in terms of that increase during the pandemic, and we've had that reduction since. So it's about 20% of children, but it does really vary based on levels of deprivation. So if we were looking at a class of children, let's say 30 children, in our more deprived areas compared to our less deprived areas, we'd say there's probably an extra three children in that class in the more deprived areas that we might see who are living with obesity. So that's a real significant number of children that we want to try and reduce those health inequalities, particularly because we're measuring them when you're starting school, so age 4 to 5 years. So we don't want to be seeing that inequality at the start of life, and we know that inequality just continues to grow as the children grow and we go through life. So it's really important that we address those health inequalities, which is what we're trying to do through the Good Food and Movement Plan, and also the Food Vale work that we're doing there, alongside things like the healthy travel charter, etc. So trying to make it an environment where, as I said earlier, a healthy choice is the easy option for people, so the easy choice for people. I hope that's answered your question, but I shall go back and see if I can add anything else into the chat that I may have missed. Thank you very much.
That's great. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Thank you, Claire. Do we have any other questions, please, for Claire or Helen on the PSB report? No? Before you go then, I just want to just reflect on one of the very important strands of this report, which is about healthy local food and the resilience of that food supply. I know that the Future Generations Commissioner has recently produced a report. Claire, I'm sure you've already read it and are familiar. And there are some recommendations in there that just reflect the criticalness of a resilient food supply. The most expensive veg is the one that you can't get. And we know climate is having massive implications on our global food supplies. So this resilient food chain is really important. And I'm just wondering if committee would support a recommendation. I know we have got some subgroups already set up within the PSB, but a subgroup for food to just kind of like help draw some of all of that good work together and to provide that focus. As we said, I know that the Future Generations Commissioner has recommended that we have food resilient plans at a local authority level going forward, that are also at a Welsh Government level. So I think potentially a food subgroup to the PSB would probably be quite a good idea. So I'm hopefully think that the committee then could think about supporting that recommendation. Does anybody have anything else though that they want to put forward on this matter? Okay, that's great. We will move to the recommendations then. There were a number of them, which I shall just come to. So it was that we review that report and the progress made against the priorities set out in the Wellbeing Plan, and consider if there are any other matters in the report that should be included in future work programme of this committee. That recommendation, if committee support it, that the PSB should look to to form a subgroup for food, particularly to focus on that resilience of the domestic food supply chain and good food for all. That members recommend this report is circulated to all of our elected members, members of the Community Liaison Committee and the Voluntary Sector Committee for their information. And also those comments, if we can have those comments, Helen, I know you said you'd take them forward, from Councillor Carroll, his concerns, as we all have, with antisocial behaviour in our wards, and for that Safer Communities subgroup to reflect on a requirement for an increase in policing or the lack of resourcing in that area. And also those comments too from Councillor Johnson in terms of the layout of that particular report, the need to, as we see it, look at KPIs, so we can look at also the aim for the 5-year period, so we can see that we're getting there, that all of the list of the things that are going on, and there's an awful lot going on, of which we're very appreciative, but that it makes sense and that there is, as he has put it, a golden thread to all of this. So if all members are happy with those recommendations and those comments be forwarded, can I have a hand to move? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. The second, Councillor Goodjohn. Right, everybody. Let's move on then to the next agenda item, which is the reference. Councillor Johnson.
Apologies, I've just received a message by Councillor Franks apologising for his absence tonight, and if we could note this in the minutes, please.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you. Right, everybody, can we move on to the next agenda item? Are we okay? So that's a reference from Cabinet on the 17th of July. This is the financial strategy 26-27 to 2030-31. And we've got Gemma Jones for us today to go through this report. Thank you, Gemma.
Good evening, Chair. This report sets out the kind of relaunch of the financial strategy, launching us into budget setting for 26-27, and also looking to roll forward and update the medium-term financial planning for the 5-year period. So it very much builds on the work that was approved by Council in March, and obviously has a key focus on long-term financial resilience for the Council. So we've restated the medium-term financial plan's assumptions. We have done a little work. So I think historically we've seen an enormous leap between the pressures that we outline in March and then the pressures that we bring later in the year when we've done work to refine all those cost pressures by services. So in light of the continuing inflationary pressures we're seeing, we did do a little work to revise those cost pressures prior to submitting this relaunch. So we have got some increase in some of the inflationary pressures. So we looked again at some of the pay pressures, but also some of the other inflationary pressures we have in the budget. So particularly around provider fees and school transport. So I suppose the chief message of this report is that there's no easing of those financial pressures that we've seen in the last few years. And I think they broadly follow the same themes that we've seen emerging around significant pressures around provider fees. And obviously some of that is related to the pressures around ensuring that those providers are paying real living wage. Also pressures around pay. And obviously that they'll continue to be revised as we go through the planning period. And having taken into account those significant pressures, so we have inflationary pressures in particular around 15 million. We are currently forecasting a funding gap of 13 million for 26-27. So that takes account of cost pressures of around 80 million, but funding around 5.6 million. And it also takes into account some reversal of prior year temporary savings, where we've made savings around the use of internal borrowing, for instance, off the back of our reserves. So, as I say, a key driver of our pressures are inflation, so around pay awards, some gap on national insurance, those social care commissioning costs and school transport contract pressures. And we've seen UK inflation remains quite high. So this report references the jump of inflation in June, but obviously we've also seen high inflation figures published this week for August. We also have ongoing demographic pressures that are reflected in this report. So a growing number of pupils with additional learning needs, and also demographic pressures around the ageing population. In terms of some of the planning assumptions around funding, so this report assumes a 1% growth per annum on the RSG. And we are seeing now some prospects emerging of a slightly better settlement, but there's still a significant gap and plenty of work to be done. And council tax is assumed within this report to increase by 3.9%, but that's purely a planning assumption. And of course, will need to be subject to a policy decision later in the process. Initial work, members will recall, was undertaken to identify reshaping opportunities throughout the medium-term financial plan. And further work has been undertaken over the summer to assess the feasibility of these initiatives. And we have had some initial feedback on those as part of the Budget Working Group Round 2. And with further work currently being undertaken to feed into the next round of Budget Working Groups, which will be in early October. Obviously, a big focus at the moment is around reviewing the cost pressures. So cost pressures have further increased with some work that's been undertaken over the summer, but they are being subject to a review. So initial review was carried out through the Budget Working Group 1, and further work is currently being undertaken to try and challenge those assumptions and refine them down wherever possible. And I suppose the other main point I wanted to make was, I think, where we're seeing those kind of more complex reshaping proposals, we really need to be reflecting on the kind of lead time to implement those savings and make sure we've got realistic profiles of delivery. So as part of this report, Resources Scrutiny Committee has been requested to review the financial strategy and the funding and cost assumptions, and for their comments to be fed back to Cabinet. But I'm happy to take any questions or comments on the report.
Thank you, Gemma. Do we have any questions on the report, please? Councillor Johnson, please come in.
Thank you, Gemma. I'd like to ask to start about the external timetable for the next year, which is our expectations in terms of the government in London giving specific figures for the year ahead and how they're going to go about that. We've discussed in the past a 3-year financial plan, for example, and what's happening there. And then also the timetable by the Welsh Government, which is to be published with statistics or a proposed funding for next year.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And I think I don't necessarily have all the answers in terms of a timetable for budget setting. I think what we're certainly seeing is some of that additional time that we were hoping to have in terms of clarity and certainty around funding being eroded slightly with the budget that's being proposed by the UK government. I know Welsh Government are working through how they can get a provisional settlement out to local authorities earlier, and they're currently kind of reviewing options. And I think there are real mixed feelings about perhaps an indicative uplift with further changes between the provisional and the final settlement. So I think some of those options are still being worked through, and we're hoping to get a bit more clarity shortly.
Okay, diolch am.
Okay, thank you for that, Gemma. If I can just return briefly to some of the comments that I made just a couple of minutes ago. You were perhaps talking about some of the work that the budget group internally within the council had undertaken, and how the feedback showed whether things were realistic or unrealistic. I just want to look at perhaps some of the expectations which are set out in Table 6B. Some of the medium-term savings, where to all intents and purposes, it's just been shared over a period of 5 years. What sort of feedback are you getting from people on how realistic it is with the savings which are suggested here? Or is it just to just briefly put it into a table in terms of perhaps, as you mentioned, raising council tax? Is there anything further you can share with us in terms of the feedback than the comments you have received? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. So I think in terms of some of the discussions at Budget Working Group, it's probably a mixed position. So I think some of the ambition around the medium-term financial plan targets was to give people a bit more advance notice of the kind of figures that we'd be looking at, but also an attempt to build some transformation into some of those emerging pressures. And I think some of those targets were seeking to build on some of the savings that we've seen in the past couple of years, certainly in the social services space, where we've seen work around releasing time to care, seeking to reduce some of the care hours and build some more independence into the process wherever possible, often with, positive outcomes for the individual as well, is certainly the intention. So I think that was certainly the ambition. I think some of those targets are quite challenging, and you'll see when we come on to the revenue monitoring report, we are seeing some lag on delivery of savings as well, which we really need to bear in mind. And also in light of some of the increasing pressure around cost pressures that we've seen over the summer, I think it's likely that not all of our savings will be met from reshaping proposals. Some of those savings, there might need to be some tactical savings as well. I think looking back at some of the savings targets that we've delivered over the past few years, it's important that we consider some of the how difficult it is now to realise savings at that same level. But certainly what our ambition is to target those reshaping savings, that transformation and alternative service delivery as much as possible. Because in an ideal world, that ensures that we're getting hopefully better outcomes for service users, as well as reducing the cost and the inefficiency of some of that service delivery. It's probably a bit of a jumbled answer, Councillor Johnson. There's still a lot of work to do in terms of refining those reshaping proposals. What we have tried to do is make sure that we're having those discussions a lot earlier, which will hopefully give us, maximise our chances of delivering those savings from April 2026, rather than starting to implement those savings from April 2026.
Okay. Diolch yn fawr. Just want to do with that yet.
Thank you very much for the update.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And thank you, Gemma. I'm sticking with the savings here because I appreciate, and I can see in the service comparator table at 1.13 that if we looked at how much we spend per head on each service across almost all of our service areas, we spend low. We're quite efficient in what we do, but we know we have one issue, really one big issue, because it is where most of our money goes, and that's in education. And we talked about it on this committee for the last year or so, and I know that there's been an awful lot of work that's already been put into this to help schools with their deficits. And I know there's going to be more. But one of the things that we had put in place was a schools procurement officer to work on behalf of schools as clusters to try and buy things collaboratively and help them with some of their tenders where they've got various different pricing from the same suppliers across schools to try and bring things in line and reduce the spend. Now I know that person has been in position for a little while. So my question is, how are they doing in terms of finding savings? Is there some report that we can see on that work that they have been able to do? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've had some feedback. So some initial work was carried out, I think, prior to the appointment of the procurement officer regarding waste contracts, and that's being worked through and has delivered some initial prospects of savings. And I think had a recent update from Education prior to committee this evening that indicated some further procurement savings had been identified in recent weeks. I think the issue we have in schools is not to minimise the benefit and the positive position that puts us in, but obviously so much of schools' budgets is related to pay and some of the schools, well, it's not all schools, but some schools are experiencing significant deficits. So I think whilst it's absolutely a really important part of the picture and absolutely makes sense in the context of the overall school's position, clearly there needs to be other steps put in place to resolve the overall school's position. But yes, absolutely, Chair. The initial feedback from those that procurement officer and the added focus on cluster and consistent procurement across schools has identified some opportunities and identified some savings, which we'll be working through. And hopefully we can perhaps pick that up as part of the Q2 monitoring to feed into committee.
Thank you, Gemma. And as I said, I'm aware that there is going to be an awful lot of work and extra support going into this particular area and this service area. So and we can talk more about that in a further agenda item. Before I bring anybody else in, can I just ask the leader who would like to just assist committee with some feedback on progress or the work that is going to be going ahead to support schools? Leader, would you like to come in? Thank you.
Actually, Chair, I can see that there are lots of people that have got comments to make, and so I'm very happy to hear those to provide context before I give a few comments that might help to provide clarification on exactly where we are in the budget setting process. Is that okay?
Oh, that's brilliant. That's no problem. I just thought you might want to add at that point. Councillor Campbell, you're next. So would you like to come in? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Gemma. So obviously we've got the multi-year spending review, which is coming out now. And we've gone through areas of instability through the last couple of years, through things that we could predict and things that we couldn't predict within the council. Do you feel on the back of everything that's happened, on the back of this report as well, that we're coming into more of a stable financial situation now as a council, so that we're able to kind of predict more as we're moving forward? Because obviously the last couple of years when we've been going into the budget setting season, we've kind of had these financial gains as we've come. Gains is probably the wrong word, but we had these financial inputs coming through at the last minute. We've had these financial reports which have come through, right to the wire, where we've had to make these decisions. Do you feel like we're coming into more of a stable situation now moving forward over the next couple of years? Or do you feel like we're still going to be hitting barriers moving forward in regards to our budget setting?
Thanks, Councillor Campbell. That's a really really good question. I'm not sure I 100% know the answer. So I think I'm really pleased that we have set targets in terms of how we intended to close the gap as part of the medium-term financial plan. I think that was absolutely the right thing to do in terms of giving services target figures towards and setting out an intention of how we would be seeking to close the gap, recognising that that gap isn't magically going to disappear. Apologies, is there quite a lot of interference? Is there anything I can do? Is that on my side or?
There is, but it's not distracting.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry, apologies. So I think that was absolutely the right thing to do. I think there is still some uncertainty around how much funding will be coming through to local authorities. Whilst I think we've done a lot of work to make sure that we can more accurately predict our pressures and analysis, and we've got more kind of feedback around where we've got things right or wrong and how we can learn from it in terms of budget setting in future years. I think you'll see a little bit from the financial monitoring that we're still not quite getting that right. We also have some emerging legislation, in the housing space, for instance, and obviously that builds a little bit more uncertainty into the picture as well. So we're not 100% clear how much funding will be passported through to local authorities from Welsh Government. We've got a little bit of uncertainty around grants, so we get a lot of specific grants within local government, and there can be some uncertainty attached to that. And we also have some uncertainty around the impact of legislation as well. So whilst I really welcome the approach we've taken in terms of attempting to close the medium-term financial gap, pressures have increased. We will obviously be reviewing those pressures and looking to revise them down. We need to make sure we're getting those pressures more accurately predicted. That will obviously have an impact on savings. And there is some other elements of uncertainty, as well as some of the inflationary pressures that we're seeing perhaps not come down towards the UK government target as well, that just all make it still quite uncertain. But we've done a lot of work that's positive to build more certainty into an uncertain picture, if that makes sense, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, would you like to come in now? Thank you. Oh dear, we can't see you or hear you at the moment. I'll go to Councillor Carroll while you try and come back in, or go back out and come back in again, maybe. Sorry, Councillor Carroll, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Chair, I just wanted to ask your thoughts on one line in the report. That's in relation to £14.942 million of pressures coming through on pay awards, NI underfunding by the UK government, care and transport. By how much is the authority being underfunded by the UK government with regard to its NI obligations?
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. So I think the figure that we, obviously since this report has published, we've had the grant for national insurance through in year. So I think at the time of publishing this report, we had built in a figure of around 624,000. And that related to the assumption of shortfall in funding across the council funds, reflecting I think we assumed 90% of our pressures would be funding and there would be a 10% gap. But I can double check that for you. Obviously, in terms of national insurance, it's slightly broader, isn't it, in terms of the impact, because there's pressures within, for instance, the local authority trading company around Big Fresh. There's also pressures in social services providers, well, and all suppliers really that the council is contracting with, and also pressures in the housing revenue account as well that need to be considered. But the figure within the figures in front of me there in July was 624,000.
The additional pressures, Gemma, are they accounted for under the inflationary pressures that are cited elsewhere in the report?
So the pressures around national insurance are reflected within the provider fees.
Right, okay.
I believe, yes. Obviously, when we're talking about pressures around the housing revenue account, housing revenue accounts are funded by rentals from housing tenants.
Yep.
And Big Fresh is funded from a mixture of income from the council in relation to free school meals, income from customers, and school meals income as well.
And with regard to the pay award, is that going to be affordable? You won't foresee any issues funding that come budget time?
Councillor Carroll, I think there is. I mean, there's shortfall in these figures, which reflects an assumed pay award. And with the inflationary figures we're seeing, there could well be pay award is contributing to some of that shortfall. I think in the past 2 years, we haven't fully funded the pay award. So I think only corporately last year we funded it in part. We did seek to fully fund it in schools, but I think services are now carrying quite a significant vacancy factor essentially against their budgets. So we'd be seeking to fully fund that pay award for the 26-27 budget setting.
Do you have a breakdown between the amount that's funded and how much is made up through posts being left vacant?
Councillor, I can get that information for you. So when we took the budget report last year, there's an analysis that shows the cost pressure that was awarded and the cost pressure that was needed, and so it analyses the differential. So I can absolutely share that information with you. As part of our update of cost pressures, we're obviously reviewing that now. The pay award for 25-26 has been agreed. We'll be reviewing those gaps as well, just to see how they're impacting the monitoring and reviewing that as part of 26-27 budget setting as well.
Have posts been left vacant deliberately to prevent cost pressures?
No, Councillor Carroll. What the vacancy factor is attempting to reflect is the natural turnover that you would see within a council's workforce. So often where people leave the council, those posts aren't recruited to immediately. So it's an attempt to ensure that salary budgets are as lean as possible and not overstated, but obviously it's a very delicate balance and it's something that has to be kept under review as part of budget setting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Carroll. So Gemma, just to clarify then, I think Councillor Carroll was asking for just that breakdown between the pay award differential and vacant posts. If that's okay, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Goodjohn, please come in.
Thank you, Chair. Gemma, just very briefly, we have on the list of potential savings in the medium term the procurement savings. Just interested if most of that is coming from the task and finish report that we implemented through this committee, and how much of that is additional resources going into savings in procurement through such as procurement officers or training for our officers. And has there been any budget at the moment allocated for next year, provisionally, towards making those savings?
Councillor Goodjohn, procurement is a really good example of a reshaping saving that we're still very much working on, identifying what that will look like. As you'll understand, it's really important that we don't double count. So where we're seeking to make savings, for instance, in social care around the cost of support for adults and children, obviously that makes up a significant proportion of the council's procurement spend. So we really need to be making sure that we're not double counting those savings. Some initial work has been done by Ardle around spend. So, and that's been taken to Insight Board recently, identifying, for instance, the top 40 suppliers within the council. And I think some work's been done to look at, but this is more at a directorate level, to look at where we've got kind of procurement of lots of small arrangements that build up to, a big figure across the council. And that's correcting our procurement activities as a council. There's no specific investment in procurement over and above the investment in the procurement officer for schools at the moment, but that's certainly something that we'll need to consider as part of identifying how we're going to achieve that procurement target over the medium-term financial plan.
Thanks, that's all from me.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, and thank you, Gemma, for that, fielding all of those questions. Leader, would you like to come in now, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's always useful to have this report at this time of the year, but I think, as Gemma said, this is more a sort of a stake in the ground in terms of pulling together all the stuff we know, but also some of the assumptions that we're going to be making moving forward as some of those unknowns actually become known and we know what we're dealing with. Councillor Carroll was talking about pay increases, this sort of thing. Some we already know what they're going to be, some haven't been negotiated yet. So we'll be looking at that. I think the benchmarking data is really useful, and we had some of that last year and this year. And I think what it tells us is that, as we know, we are a low-funded council. We're also a low council tax council. And interestingly, somebody said to me, we're the highest council tax in Wales. And I said, we're not actually. We're the sixth lowest. We're the sixth from bottom council tax level. And as a consequence of being low funded and low council tax, and also being an efficient council, we're low spending. We're low spending in the vast majority of our service areas. But I think what we do have to be considerate of is if we look at our ambitious corporate plan, Vale 2030, looking at what we want to achieve for our citizens for the next 5 years, we are ambitious. And we will have to have those conversations as we go forward in terms of how we are going to pay for those services, and to actually look at how that is going to. Sorry, noise in my room. How we are going to deliver those services going forward. That the budget consultation and Life in the Vale, the Life in the Vale survey that's just been launched, will give us an insight into what local people feel about that, and hopefully we can have further discussions. I think that if we have a look, there was a recent cabinet report on corporate landlord. That's how we're looking to be more effective when we're looking at the transformational programs. And I was in a meeting earlier this week, going through looking at the progress of Big Fresh, our catering company, and what they're actually able to achieve. And I actually think that for some members, they might find a separate briefing on some of those initiatives of interest to see what we've done, how we achieved it, and how we've taken things forward, so that they are really good services, but we haven't had to plough a fortune into them to get them that way. So we are at stake in the ground position. We don't have a sort of a definite thing. We're saying, well, we think we'll model on this level of council tax, we'll model on that level of income from Welsh Government, and this is currently what it might look like. When we come back to you later in the year, we will hopefully have more fixed figures, but it doesn't stop people having conversations now, and I think that this is something that we all need to participate in constructively to deliver the best for our residents. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. I know we're going to be starting public participation on the budget early again. And it just feels like, it must feel like this for you, Gemma, as well. It's just a continual cycle, isn't it? But yeah, I think the more public participation we can have on this, the better. So do we have any other questions now on the financial strategy, please? No? Okay. That's brilliant.
Sorry, Chair, would you like to just try Councillor Lovelock-Edwards one more time to see if she's able to now connect to us? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, Liz. Hey, we've got Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
I'm Chair. It's been one of those evenings, and probably this contribution from me is not going to add of value, but it's actually the strand follows on from what you've just referenced, which is public participation, and I just wanted to make a couple of points in that. I note in the report that that's going to be sort of ramped up this year. And clearly, as a council, we based some of the decision making around sort of the Let's Talk About Life in the Vale survey results and how people felt. Clearly, that reiteration is out now, and I'm just wondering, am I correct in assuming that this latest iteration will help shape or form any key decisions around costs and strategies to manage costs that are being considered, because sadly we are challenged in terms of damned if we do, damned if we don't, and there are residents who quite rightly scrutinise our budget and our financial strategy, and I welcome the more people that participate in that consultation, the better. So am I correct? Sorry for the waffle. Am I correct in assuming that the latest iteration of Life in the Vale survey will come to sort of fruition, or the results will be collated and fed into any specific teams or directorates where needed to consider what the public and our residents feel and shaping services going forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. Gemma, any comments on the public participation bit? Thank you.
I mean, I think we also really welcome people's comments and thoughts on the budget setting. Absolutely don't want to be setting a budget in a darkened room. We want people to understand why the decisions have been taken, but also feed into how those decisions are made. So absolutely, we'll be drawing on the Let's Talk participation survey, but all other participation and surveys that have been undertaken by the council that we can place reliance on as well. Because, there's lots of opportunities around part of this budget setting, as well as revenue, as well as capital as well. The council still, after taking account of these cost pressures, has discretionary money to allocate and can consider what services are safeguarded and invested in, and preventative budget and investment proposals are also an important part of this budget setting, although constrained by the availability of resources. So yeah, absolutely, I agree with what Councillor Lovelock-Edwards is saying, and we will be taking account of all the participation surveys as part of budget setting.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. Okay then, is there anybody else? Any more for any more before we move to the next agenda item? I can't see any hands, so I'm going to take that as a no. Okay, so the recommendations were that we reviewed the financial strategy. I think apart from the request from Councillor Carroll for that data breakdown on the difference between vacant posts and the pay award, I don't think there was anything else that we're asking for today. So can I have a hand to move, please, to the next agenda item? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Elphick-Edwards. Brilliant. Okay then, so agenda item, where are we on now? 5. I think we're on 5. We are on 5. That's the capital monitoring 2025-2026 quarter 1, which is 1st of April to the 30th of June. This is another reference that's come to us from Cabinet on the 4th of September. And I'm afraid it's your night, Gemma, so it's back to you.
Oh, it's lovely to have people listening to me waffling on about finance. So, capital monitoring report. I'll run through this one really quickly to maximise time available for any questions or comments. So this takes us to quarter 1, and members will be aware that typically the capital spend in the programme isn't linear. So spend to the end of June is 7 million against a projected outturn of 127 million. I would be expecting some slippage on that sum. And what we've tried to introduce as part of this monitoring report, and I'd be really interested for members' thoughts on how successful this is. And obviously it'd be a bit of an iterative process, but we're attempting to note for schemes over 250,000 a risk rating that would reflect broadly whether those schemes are expected to be achieved in full to profile, and whether those schemes would be subject to, for instance, some delay on delivery or maybe a request for additional funding. We have attempted to set out a kind of categorisation process within the report, and we will be discussing that risk review at SLT as part of the review of monitoring reports as part of quarter 2. And what we're attempting to do is just bring a little bit of extra attention to schemes where there are some delays or potentially some additional capital bids that will need to be considered in order to finalise those schemes. We're requesting £3 million slippage as part of this quarter monitoring, but I would certainly expect some additional slippage as we progress through the report. And the report also details some delegated authority requests that have been approved and the use of emergency powers. We do try and highlight schemes within the capital programme, because obviously this is our kind of opportunity to invest in the Vale of Glamorgan. So we've got a Welsh Government grant for active travel that's outlined within the scheme, and also a Section 106 funded scheme for Murchfield community space. There are a couple of amendments that are requested as part of the capital programme. So we've got a reprofile of the Cowbridge primary base, phase 2, which is at Yolo in 25-26 and the future years capital programme. And that's partly due to the complexity of the scheme. We would expect to see some reprofiling there. We've also got the inclusion of the Enable grant scheme in the 25-26 capital programme. Now, within this report, which we haven't seen in previous years, but we will see going forward, is a request to include revised lease arrangements that are due to commence in 25-26 and have met the threshold for inclusion under IFRS 16. And within the report, they're shown at the amount that needs to be included in the capital programme, and that's the sum of the principal and interest payments discounted over the life of the lease. But we also have included the annual value of the lease payments in 25-26 as well. And there are 2 of those schemes that are included. There's the printer contract and also a demountable building at Ysgol-y-Derry. So those are the main headlines of the report, but happy to take any questions.
I'm not sure committee if we've lost Gemma. She kind of very quickly disappeared then.
I think she's still connected, Chair. I think it may have
She's
just been...
still here.
There
No,
we
she's
go.
still here.
Thanks.
Wonderful. I don't know what I was going to do then, Gemma, if I was going to have to answer committee's questions on your behalf. Anyway, committee, do we have any questions for Gemma, please? Thank you. Councillor Goodjohn.
Hi, Gemma. So it's talked about quite a bit in the capital monitoring that we have tenders that are going over budget as being a significant problem for the capital side of things at the moment. Has any consideration been taken towards capped spends when coming to, I'm talking procurement again, I must apologise, but have there been any consideration for capped spends when making tenders?
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. I'm feeding in my kind of memories from Monday night, Councillor Goodjohn, because I think this was picked up as some feedback on one of the items on Monday night, and I think we fed back, but Tom might be able to come in and clarify a bit more that we weren't looking at a kind of blanket approach around implementing capped tenders, but we would continue to keep it under review. Tom, I'm not sure whether you're able to confirm that position.
Yes, certainly, Gemma, no problem at all. And that's absolutely the case. And in some instances, absolutely, the use of capped price tenders will be really important, and we'll be actively exploring those. We'll also be looking at making sure we do any of the relevant cost engineering on schemes, and then the importance, as Gemma was saying earlier, in terms of looking at the overall budget available for different schemes and where they're at in terms of their delivery, to see where we can reprofile expenditure where appropriate. Hope that helps.
Thanks both.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. I noticed as well that when we looked at the current programme, which is at 129.44 million, and as Councillor Goodjohn has alluded to, some of those capital programmes have increased in pricing. Understandable. Sometimes you have compensation events. You don't really know till you stick that spade in the ground exactly what's going to come back at you. And I just wanted to double check. So where we've had that happening and there is a justification to request more money, do you as finance get that justification as well, and a robust justification so that it's understood? Gemma, is that something that you can answer? I'm really checking on the process for you, really, for asking for extra money. Thank you.
So I think the justification for asking for extra money can be really mixed, probably, if I'm honest. Obviously, with the scarcity of resources, it's subject to significant review internally. So where we're funding any need for extra resources, that would go to SLT in terms of a request to draw down from reserves, and all those drawdown from reserves are actually subject to additional review, as we'll be picking up on the monitoring report item next. We've got significant layers of review around new bids in the capital programme as well. So all our bids in the capital programme and where people need extra money for schemes, that would be subject to a new capital bid in most cases, unless it's an emergency arrangement. So they go through a kind of long listing review at Insight Board, and then they're shortlisted, and then subject to a full capital bid and further reviewed at Budget Working Group and SLT. So I think there's always kind of room for improvement in terms of making sure that need is further analysed and reviewed and justified wherever possible. But we have quite strong governance around increasing costs in the capital space.
That's really really positive and good to hear. I wonder if anyone else got any other questions on this particular agenda item. No? Okay, thank you. Just want to highlight a point from the paper, which I think is really good news. And that was that you've managed to get us an extra 2.7 million for additional highways resurfacing, which is jolly good news. And I can share that our road through Ogmore by Sea, a big section of it was resurfaced a couple of weeks ago. So that's some very happy residents as well. And good news for the Vale with that extra money. Right then, so if there's no more questions on this particular agenda item, we'll just move to the recommendations. And they were that we review quarter one of the capital monitoring, which we have done. I don't think there were any other questions or recommendations that we wanted to put forward today. So if we can have a hand to move to the next agenda item. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Excellent. Right then, so now we're on agenda item 6. That is quarter one revenue monitoring 25-26. Another reference from Cabinet from the 4th of September. And it's back to Gemma. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of this item, I was planning on taking it in 2 parts, Chair, but you're happy to be informed by how members want to handle it. So I was planning on talking initially about the corporate pressures, and then taking the schools deficits position as almost like a second part of the item, which hopefully is okay.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So in terms of the corporate pressures, I think we are seeing a continuation of some of those emerging themes that we've had over the last few years. Corporately, we're projecting unplanned use of reserves of 3 million. And at the end of the quarter one, we're seeing ongoing pressures within children's and adult services. And that's largely due to those ongoing pressures around the ageing demographic and increasing complexity of need. But it is partly muddied by some of the reshaping savings that we have targeted at some of those pressures. So some of that pressure is related to lag on delivery of savings that is targeted at those commissioning type budgets. So what I would say is those underlying pressures have been mitigated in part through the growth awarded as part of the 25-26 budget. But because we've got quite challenging savings targets related to reshaping some of those services and those demand pressures, we are seeing some lag in implementation, which is leading to some projected overspend at year end. We're also seeing some overspend in the school transport space. So we're projecting an overspend of £320,000. And members will recall that we've seen overspends in this area for a number of years also. And that's in part due to some of the reduced supply in the market in the school transport space, but also because we're seeing pressure around additional learning needs, pupils, and the transport need. So this area is subject to significant reshaping work. So members from the financial strategy item will have noted that there is a school transport saving that's targeted at addressing some of those emerging pressures. And significant reshaping work has been commenced in this area. Some of it as simple as establishing a school transport board, attempting to bring together cross-directorate working and scrutiny around those new school transport arrangements. So this area is one that will be monitored closely as we progress through the year to understand the potential impacts of any emerging ALM placements, any kind of emerging pressures around inflationary and contract letting, and also whether there's any associated reduction in costs that can be realised. Another key theme corporately is around lag on delivery of savings. So I talked about it briefly around social services, and we were expecting some lag on delivery of savings, and we specifically set aside £2 million in the budget risk reserve as part of the final position to fund that projected shortfall in savings. And that's partly because some of the reshaping services are very complex. They're reliant on either transferring assets or preventative or demand type work being undertaken. And some of that work is contingent on recruiting to posts or establishing new services. But I think we do pick up in this report that theme needs to be further considered for the 26-27 budget setting. Just to briefly link into schools, I think the overall position clearly is having an impact on reserves. So we have at this point in the year quite significant use of reserves for the capital programme. We have planned and unplanned use of reserves corporately, and then we also have the savings position. The progress against 25-26 savings targets is reflected in Appendix 9. We're seeing a real mix of some mitigation of savings not achieved with temporary income or other savings. And we're also attempting to keep under review savings that haven't been achieved in 23-24 and 24-25. And perhaps it's some of those savings actually where we're seeing some more significant lag on delivery of savings, sometimes because of, very well understood reasons like the dock office, for instance, where some of that delay is around the delivery of the levelling up scheme. We're also requesting environments as part of this report, and they're reflected in a table within the report. So that's the corporate position. That I should say as well, apologies, that there are pressures within additional learning needs and homelessness as well. They continue to be pressures for the council, but they're largely mitigated through grants and built up planned reserves in 25-26. But obviously, continue to be a significant pressure going into budget setting for 26-27. So, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions on the corporate part of the monitoring, and then I'll come back and do a separate item on.
That's great. Thank you, Gemma, for that. Committee then, if we could just use this part of that presentation, as Gemma has said, to direct your questions on the corporate side. Do we have any questions for Gemma on what she's just shared with us? No? You were comprehensive there, Gemma, obviously, with everything you said. Or they're saving it all for the schools bit. Over to you.
I completely understand. Yes. So in terms of the schools position, it's obviously quite concerning figures that we're reporting within the report. I think we wanted to show the current position, and as we note within the report, historically, we have seen some improvements on the net deficit position as we progress through the year. So I think last year we saw around a £6 million reduction in the projected net deficit as we progress through the financial year. So in 24-25, we ended the year with a 4.2 million net deficit. And we had set aside specific reserves to offset that projected position. As you can see from the monitoring, we are projecting further deficits in 25-26, and they're currently projected to end the year at just over 16 million. And we haven't made any attempt at the moment to say where we think those net deficits will end up. It is clear in the context of these figures that greater action does need to be taken. So members will recall last year, in addition to the procurement resource we set aside, there was also some additional resource identified for support around leadership and teaching practices. And that resource has started to go out into schools to support schools with deficit. We are really mindful that when, as a council, we're instructing schools to set a balanced budget, that they are experiencing really significant pressures and challenges in respect of, purely from a financial perspective, pay, additional learning need, and wellbeing needs. And falling pupil numbers in the primary sector is also a significant challenge. but as a council, clearly this sum is something that we need to address. So the Director of Learning and Skills, since the start of the financial year, has worked with schools and governing bodies to develop plans to address deficits. And there are a number of schools who have very high irrecoverable deficits. So the figures that are presented in the report mask a real variety of very, very significant deficits that have not got recovery plans to far smaller marginal deficits that could be recovered. This isn't reflected in the report, but we have spoken to schools and we'll be writing to a small number of schools informally, requesting that they take steps to address their deficit by autumn half term. Where appropriate, a meeting will be put in place with the Chief Executive Director of Learning and Skills, Head of Finance, and the leader to discuss what steps can be taken. We also do need to think about how further support will be provided to schools with smaller deficits to support the delivery of recovery plans. And for instance, an example of a step that's been taken is developing a training package for governing bodies on how some of those steps can be taken. I think that was the main points I was going to make on that, but I am happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Gemma. Yes, and as a committee that's tasked with looking at the overall financial health of the authority, obviously this is of great concern to us too. I can see that, the schools that are in deficit, so that's 31 primaries, a super school and 4 secondary schools. And it says that all schools have submitted recovery plans and business cases, but only one recovery plan has fully recovered the deficit position. Does that mean we'll have recovered by the end of the financial year if they do everything that they've said they'll do? Is that what that means? But all of the others haven't actually provided a plan that's going to be able to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I think when we're talking about schools recovering deficits, we usually target achievement of recovery of that deficit position within three years, and we'll go up to 5 years on exception, I think, or certainly have done in the past. And there's a number of ways we can treat recovery of deficit. So I think the first port of call is recovering the full deficit within 3 years. And, by the end of that 3 years period, there would be no carrying deficit for the school. Another option we have when looking at trying to address deficits, and this isn't a long-term option, but it might be helpful in the medium term, is to look at just addressing the in-year deficit in the first instance. And that's another option we're looking at to try and help bring the number of schools with severe deficits down and the number of schools that are potentially needing that additional intervention down as well.
Thank you, Gemma. And this is really important that we have an opportunity to scrutinise the progress, because this is quite a significant project, isn't it, to make and help the schools to get back on track. So I'm hoping that committee will support a recommendation for, as you said, is it the half term in October? You're hoping to get some feedback from the schools that you're working with more closely, if that can be shared with us. I appreciate we don't want to go into particular detail of which schools, but out of all of these, 35, 36 schools, there are also schools that aren't in a deficit, and we need to understand what are the differences and how they can help each other. So I would really like to see a report coming back to us, if that's okay for you, for our committee to be able to have a look at how this is progressing. I've got Councillor Lovelock Edwards now who'd like to ask a question. Thank you.
Yes, Chair, thank you. And it follows on from your comment on a report further down the line, because I think the point you made is quite a key one. And that is, whilst we, we don't need to go into the nitty gritty at this point of the names of the schools, and I do think that it would be helpful for us in perhaps, as you say, further down the line, if we have some sort of mapping exercise, because the conversation earlier was around obviously the plan around the sort of future generations, and I think it was Dr. Emma Clayton talked about the health and well-being of future generations. So it would be good to have a look at sort of any links to school deficits and sort of in those areas which sort of data tells us are in the more deprived areas of the Vale, if they need additional support, because we know that one support that we sometimes give is sort of, not necessarily bespoke. It's one size fits all because of the nature of the work that we do. But I think in this instance, when we're dealing with education and future attainment and the future life chances of children, that we go the extra mile and we do a little bit more digging around sort of the impact that deficits may have. Because I think that we're, 5-6 weeks away from October half term. And I'm not sure whether what happens if a school is not able or in a position to put forward such a plan at that stage. Are they going to be given an opportunity to present a plan, sort of, have more time to present a plan? Are there any sort of alternatives or, plan B in terms of giving schools perhaps extra time if they're not able legitimately and for genuine and sort of good reason, not able to put forward a plan in this space and time. And I don't know if that's feasible or if you've given them a strict timeline for specific reasons, because I appreciate we need to know what the plan is. We don't expect our school leaders to be business leaders, but we do expect them to sort of understand sort of their budget planning process. And I just want to say as well, I welcome the comment that you made, Gemma, on additional training packages for governors, because governors are invariably volunteer roles. So any additional support we could give to those governors who give up their time and their energies to support their local school and their local community. And again, we need to ensure that they are equipped with the skills, knowledge and expertise to be able to guide the senior leaderships in each school so that they are making informed decisions. And perhaps that's where, if we're being honest, perhaps that's where there's been a gap in that lack of training or knowledge, has perhaps, maybe I'm making too many assumptions here, has led to sort of, decisions being made that could have been better scrutinised within a governing body context. And I'll end there.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think, I don't think as a council, these are hard deadlines. I think what we're seeking through the use of the informal processes, engagement and participation in ensuring that we're achieving progress towards that deficit recovery. So there's support available for schools, there's peer support available for schools, and we want to work with governing bodies and leadership teams to address those deficits and make progress towards eliminating them as much as possible. I don't want to understate the funding challenges that our schools are experiencing. They are, as a council, we're experiencing funding pressures, and schools are very exposed to pay pressures and inflationary pressures as well. But there is a real discrepancy across schools in terms of schools that have been able to set a balanced budget as well, and that's also a factor. So I think there is a group of schools that are being probably targeted is the wrong word, but looking at initially, because they are in that higher bracket of irrecoverable deficit. But absolutely, as a council, I think our main priority is ensuring that we're working with those schools to address those deficits, and that all that support that we're trying to put in place, and where more support is needed, we're absolutely happy to look at that, is being taken up, and we're working with senior leadership teams and governing bodies wherever possible.
Thank you, Gemma. Councillor Johnson, please come in with your question.
Diolch.
Thank you, Gemma. Obviously, this is increasingly becoming a problem over the last few years. In a number of schools who are failing to create an equal budget and are in a deficit, it's very worrying. Just as Councillor Lovelock Edwards said about the impact on children, especially disadvantaged children, because of this. I was just going to ask, in terms of what is going to happen, obviously we realise there are local difficulties because 2/3 do not expect to be able to leave a deficit budget this year as things stands currently. We do know as well from previous years that there is a tendency for the situation to improve during the year because of grants coming in and so on. But what sort of discussions are there happening on a national level to address this through the WLGA, through Welsh Government, to come up with a solution? Because obviously this is something that is not a local problem to Barry Council only. I saw an article earlier today about the number of schools in Newport expecting to overspend this year as well. So I do feel there are probably some lessons to be learnt by those who are closer to being able to influence. But what is being done to solve this? Because obviously 2/3 of schools are finding it's difficult to recover from deficit. It is not as if it's a local problem, it's a systematic problem rather. And it's not always anything to do with any difficulties or deficiencies by the individual schools affected. And so is there anything more that you can tell us about this, Gemma? One final point, obviously there is one school that quite obviously is in a deficit within that table that we can see, but perhaps I missed this in the detail. But what is your target in order to get rid of such severe deficits? What's the best way to recover this? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. So just to try and cover some of your points. So obviously as a council, we sit on a number of groups with other local authorities. So the Association of Directors of Education in Wales has done a focused piece of work, and we've fed into that our projected deficits with a health warning because of that historical trajectory that we have seen. So there's a piece of work being undertaken by them to kind of review those projected deficits. I think we have benchmarked our position against other local authorities, and I agree there is a national problem. I haven't seen the article about Newport. I absolutely will go and seek it out. I think my feedback was that it seemed to be slightly more severe in the Vale proportionately, but it may be that some of those schools' deficits are emerging now in the September, in the autumn term, and are starting to feed into monitoring reports now. So I'll absolutely go out and do further benchmarking around that position. We have also fed into the WLGA. So obviously the WLGA are doing a big piece of work with Welsh Government and feeding into the pressures for 26-27 budget setting, but are also highlighting our in-year pressures and specifically around schools. So that's a piece of work that we're feeding into as well. So I absolutely agree. There is a national problem in schools. Some of that is around some of those themes of pressures that we're seeing around things like additional learning needs, that exposure to inflationary pressures and pay pressures that we need to take into account. But it also may be that some schools have more local circumstances that are feeding into that deficit position that we need to examine in the coming months as well.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Goodjohn, would you like to come in with your question? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gemma. I am aware that we've had a procurement officer helping and supporting schools, but obviously it's not being successful completely with all these schools. And I'm wondering now if we need to go steps further with doing a bit more business leading with them and helping them, as of course they're specialised in teaching. And I'm wondering if we need to be a bit more hands-on in a different way to help the schools, even if it isn't business leading as a special business leader being employed or put in place, whether mentoring from parallel schools that are similar to them, who are reaching their budgets. I'm wondering if I understand every school is different, but really if the schools could work together as well in taking the good points and how they've been managing and taking that on board. I also think about governing bodies. A governor myself, if a school of mine is in deficit, I would be really keen to talk to the local authority directly to the governors. I understand we do get a lot of training for finance, and it is a training that we mandatorily need to complete. But I'm wondering again if we need to have more involvement with the governors and to speak to those governors and point out exactly where the school could be making savings and identifying those savings that could be made to the governors as well as the schools, and just being a lot more hands-on in the actual business rather than just in procurement and helping more. Thank you.
Councillor Goodjohn, I think you make some really good points. I don't think we as a council would rule out any ideas, and absolutely schools, have so many challenges to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and we need to consider whether it makes sense sometimes for schools to be doing the same activities on an individual basis, or whether there's any economies of scale or more efficiency that we can offer, and also whether we can kind of share expertise among schools. So those are some ideas that have been talked about, and perhaps when we bring the report in terms of the school's position, the more detailed report, we can outline, in more detail some of the thoughts, because I know my education colleagues have been doing a lot of work in that space. And I think, in terms of training needs, there is a package that's being put forward that seeks to address more specifically some of the governance and finance considerations out there. But, always happy to, consider more support where it's needed. In terms of peer review, my understanding is that peer review is available to schools and is offered to schools where appropriate. And, for some of the larger primary schools, it may be that peer review and support is more appropriate coming from a secondary school, given the size of some of the primaries in the Vale. So my understanding is that is in place and on offer. And hopefully that does help schools identify potential opportunities when addressing some of these deficits.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. It's it's having things on offer, but then at a point where the school is in deficit, they're not taking up these offers. I think there needs to be a point where we actually say, look, really, you need to sit around a table and speak to these other schools and being a lot more robust in this. I'd be very interested in the report when it comes through. But it is very worrying for the council's budget. You know, it's almost like... I don't want to be hard on the schools. I understand it must be very difficult, but you know, we haven't got an open checkbook for them to be writing in. You know, I don't want to sound, but this is a lot of money, and we really need to take control of this. And the more support and the more encouragement that we give to engage with the other schools would be a massive help, I'm sure. Thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you.
Just to very quickly, apologies, just to very quickly come back. I mean, I think Councillor Goodjohn makes a very good point, and I don't want to overstate or scaremonger at all, but obviously at the moment this sum is being set against the council's reserves, and so there are obviously issues and implications for schools in terms of not being able to set a balanced budget and the impact of that on the school, but also from a council perspective, obviously that it limits our ability to utilise those reserves and for the purposes that they were set aside for, and is a source of significant risk for the council, particularly if that deficit is realised in full.
Thank you, Gemma. And over the last 3.5 years, I will constantly remember that saying that, the reserves are great, but once you spent them, they've gone. So I echo what you're saying. We've got the leader who'd like to come in, and I think she's probably going to help us understand some of the support that's going into this. So would you like to come in, leader? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's a really difficult one because we are hugely supportive of our schools, and we totally value what they do. So much so that actually, as a council, we have supported our schools above SSA since 2012, without exception. But I think we also have to recognise that it's a very strange funding situation, isn't it? That we over 50% of our budget basically goes straight out of the door without, to all intents and purposes, any checks and balances, because schools have total autonomy over their budgets. The budget formula, how the budget is split up between schools, was actually devised in collaboration with schools themselves, and so there was an agreement of how that schools funding was delivered to schools. We recognise that maybe that's not as fit for purpose as it was. So there is a review on that. But we know that our schools need help to manage their budgets in an increasingly complex environment. We already know with some of the support we've provided that maybe some contracts that they were in weren't as cost effective as they could have been. There are other areas of spend that maybe we could change things, that maybe they could look at the services they procure, and maybe there are other areas there, and there have already been constructive conversations. But I think what has caused us one of the larger areas of concern is there is disparity between schools. You can actually look at schools with the same demographics, same number of children, etc., and actually see that some are in surplus and some are in sizable deficit. And we need to understand why that is, and we need to help schools to understand why that is, and to help them come back in, because the major amount of deficit actually comes down to a smaller number of our schools, probably about 10. And so there needs to be some very, very serious work done to support them. And we are in regular touch, as Gemma said, that there are groups of directors of social services, of education. There are social services as well, but directors of education. There are groups where our Section 151 officer it meets with others. There's a group of cabinet members for education, and also I act as the WLGA spokesperson for education. So I have regular meetings with the Cabinet Secretary for Education, and she's fully aware of the education situation across Wales, I would say, although there are areas where we are more acute. So while we are supportive of schools, while we are working to find a solution to this, it is essential that in terms of openness and transparency that Scrutiny is fully appraised of the current situation. And I look forward to Scrutiny having further reports on this as we go forward. And you know, I look forward to more constructive news hopefully in the not too distant future. So we are supportive, but things need to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. That was really helpful for committee to hear that. Do we have any other questions then following the Leader's comments or to Gemma on this? No? Okay, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much for all of your contributions to that particular agenda item. The recommendations then, the recommendation was that we review the Q1 revenue monitoring report, which we have done. We are also going to put forward a recommendation from this committee that the schools recovery plan and some detail on the measures that are going to be taken will come back to this committee. I'm saying, would by the next committee be too soon? Shall we give it a 6-month period? Gemma, what makes sense to you? I understand the recovery plans, as you said, are between 3 and 5 years, but we have to see progress, and we want to do that in a transparent, public way. So, what do you think would be sensible?
Chair, I think it would be good to have a little bit of time to make some progress on the school's individual positions. But I would want to, given the level of concern that we all share, I would like to do something probably around the same time as the Q2 monitoring. Because that was just a good idea. We might know a little bit more about Welsh Government grants as well. Although I wouldn't want to mask those underlying pressures, but I also don't want to realise the deficit. So I think it would be really helpful to do something at Q2, and we can provide a further update after Christmas, perhaps going into some more detail of how successful some of those measures have been.
Yes, and as I think quite a few councillors have alluded to, appreciate the complexities. It could be different for different areas. We want to understand if demographics play a part, but I think as the Leader has also alluded to, you have very similar schools in very similar demographic areas with number of pupils that seem to be managing things in a different way. So we would like to see that reflected actually in the report. If there is a way of you being able to identify what are the differences, so we would look forward to seeing that too.
Chair, Education have done some really interesting analysis around demographic trends, senior leadership teams. There's lots and lots of bits of data. They're turning over every stone, I think. So absolutely, we'll be working with my education colleagues to pull something together, which hopefully will give you a feel of some of that information. Thank you.
Yeah, we look forward to that. Okay, then, everyone. So that recommendation was the report will come back to us at Q2, and then a more detailed report in the goodness of time. So can I have a hand to move, please? Is everybody still there? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Thank you, Councillor Norman, and Councillor Drake as well. Thank you. Right, so that's bringing us towards the end of our meeting. I think the next item, which is any items that the chair considers to be urgent, part 1, we don't have any. And then part 2, which is the press and public exclusion bit, we don't have any there either. So I just want to thank everybody for your participation. Thank you, everyone. Gemma especially, you've been an absolute trooper. So thank you very much for your efforts. And I think everyone, the next meeting, Liz has already told me, and I'm rubbish at this, I think it was November the 19th. Is that right,
correct,
Liz?
Chair. Yes, Wednesday, the 19th of November.
Excellent. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will meet again soon. Good night.